Hi, this is Natalie Hoffman of FlyingFreeNow.com, and you're listening to the Flying Free Podcast, a support resource for women of faith looking for hope and healing from hidden emotional and spiritual abuse. Welcome to episode 106 of the Flying Free Podcast. Today, our guest is Tim Fall. He's a Superior Court judge in Northern California. He also teaches judicial ethics to experienced judges throughout his state. And he's a writer. He's got a brand new book that's just out in which he writes about the pressures of being a judge and his battle with mental illness. Now, I know Tim from his Facebook posts where he advocates for women and other marginalized members of society. Welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Thank you very much for having me here.
So let's start by talking about having you share a little bit about why you, a male judge, have an interest in supporting and encouraging women in your profession as a judge and in the church and in society generally. Because, I want to know what the connection is, because we don't typically see men coming out in droves to support women or other marginalized members of society. So what is the connection for you? What's the drive?
I think like a lot of people my age who grew up in California, that the experience of growing up through the civil rights movement and the women's lib movement was something that formed a lot of my attitude about people who are marginalized. Not that I knew what that phrase meant way back then, because I was just a kid, but it did have a big impact on who I am and what I see and value around me. And then becoming a Christian in my early 20s, I would read the Bible, and it says a lot about people who are oppressed. Jesus in his first recorded synagogue sermon, if you look at Luke 4, he preaches on freeing the oppressed and helping people who are in need, people who are marginalized and cast out of society. So I guess I came at it from both directions, my life experiences and my faith.
So I'm curious to know then, as a judge, so a lot of the women that listen to this podcast, most of them are either living in abusive relationships, or they're trying to get out of them, or they're already out. But many of the women have come in contact with the judicial system in the effort of trying to get divorced from an abusive spouse. And it's a scary experience. And I'm sure there are going to be women listening to this episode who are anticipating being in court with their abuser, facing a judge, having their whole future lie in the hands of a judge. I'm wondering if judges receive any kind of training in to understand where these people are coming from, people who are they're like the underdog and they're trying to get out of really bad situations, and they're maybe being used and powered over by other people.
I don't know what happens with judicial education in other states, but in California, we have mandatory education for judges who are going into the family law assignment that includes domestic violence education and domestic violence dynamics. Same thing in criminal law, where we deal with crimes that are charged under what would be called domestic violence statutes or situations. So there's a lot of education in that. And then generally, we also have education about implicit bias, microaggressions, bringing a fair appearance, not only the fair actual fairness of a courtroom, but the appearance of fairness in courtrooms to people who are coming in and may not really understand what is going on in the courtroom. So it's not just people who are in a domestic violence situation necessarily there. Those trainings have a much broader application.
Okay, do you think California is an outlier that way in that, or is this, I mean, maybe you don't know.
I have no idea what
Okay.
other states do with their judicial education.
Okay, because that seems pretty amazing to me. I guess my follow-up question to that would be how can judges help? How can judges help if they are supposed to be, unbiased and just be looking at like, this is a common thing that happens. A woman will come and she won't necessarily have the paper proof or the paper trail or whatever that I feel like judges are looking for and needing. So how can they, and oftentimes because of that, the equitable ruling is, and with, because there's no proof of anything and it's not a criminal case. So then they just end up losing a lot of, maybe things are equitable as far as financially, although sometimes that can go wonky too. But as far as like custody of children and that kind of thing, it doesn't always go in their favor. And how do judges even parse that out and be able to tell the difference? Because everyone's got it the same, everyone's got the same story. I mean, the men are saying the same thing. Yeah, abusers will just accuse the woman of abusing them. So how do judges figure all of that out?
I don't know that I would say that having the paper trail is what judges look for or need. I make a lot of decisions in cases where it's just oral testimony that is leading to the decision. And both in criminal and family law, those decisions can often be a finding of domestic violence having occurred. So I'll sometimes have cases that are not necessarily custody. It could just be a restraining order that's being requested in a domestic violence situation. We actually have a process in California to pursue what's called a domestic violence restraining order. And a lot of times there's no paper trail. There are no texts. There's no voicemails left. I'm just listening to someone testify about what happened, and then can make a finding based on that there was violence and that the restraining order is warranted. So I don't know what other judges are doing in other states, but in California, we are trained in how to evaluate the evidence and make the orders accordingly. I think another thing, though, and you mentioned in the context of custody, in California, custody determinations are made on the basis of what's in the best interest of the child. So going outside of domestic violence for a moment, let's say one of the spouses cheated on the other spouse. And so the aggrieved spouse, woman or man, comes to court and says, well, he had an affair, so give me the kids and deny him all custody. It's like, well, that's not how we make custody decisions on the basis of who had an affair. We make custody decisions based on what's in the best interest of the kids. Now, that affair may have been in a circumstance that does then touch upon what's in the best interest of the children. It may not. And for one person then to say, now let's get into domestic violence, perhaps, for one person to say, she had an affair, and then she says, and he beat me, then we're talking about, the affair is not necessarily going to be seen by the judge as being of equal importance to the best interest of the kids as the domestic violence. So in California, if there's a finding of domestic violence, then there's an automatic presumption that the perpetrator does not get custody. And for the perpetrator to get custody rights, they need to somehow overcome that presumption with evidence that shows that they are still someone who should have some sort of custodial right, because that would be in the best interest of the child. So the burden then shifts, right? Once domestic violence is found against the mom or the dad, then that parent bears the burden of proving that it's still in the best interest of the children for them to have some level of custody rights.
That's very fascinating. And you have no idea if, I just feel like, maybe you could just give me your opinion. Do you think that, when I think, so I come out of this very conservative background and upbringing. And in my head, these were all the biased thoughts that were in my head. Okay. California is just this flaming liberal state that just wants to, I don't know, it's just all negative. Okay. And then all of these beautiful Bible Belt states, they were the ones that were the godly ones. And they just, cared about the people, and they were flinging guns all over the place, but they're the ones that cared about people. So now coming out of all of that and doing a whole bunch of deconstruction and trying to get my bearings on life here,
right.
It feels like, I most of the people that I work with, the women that I work with, come out of the Bible Belt. Like that's where there is like rampant abuse going on.
Right.
And those same people are also running into so many roadblocks in the legal system trying to keep their kids safe. And because the bias in those places seems to be, based on my talking to women, the bias seems to be more towards the male rather than the female. And it doesn't matter what the testimonies are. It's just, there's just this natural bias. Can you talk about that?
I would say that in California, there is as much abuse going on, domestic violence going on per capita as anywhere else, probably. But it's the cultural issues that you have to overcome. So if you're in a region where the patriarchy is strong, then when someone comes in with a domestic violence claim, it may be a matter of, yes, he's guilty of domestic violence. However, the man is the head of the household, so we are not taking the children out of his life.
Yes.
That's a cultural issue. I'm not talking about legal matters right now. I'm just talking culturally. So how much support is that woman going to get in her community, church, social clubs, the kids' school, whatever it might be? And then you come out to a place like California where the patriarchy is not as strong. It's not that it's non-existent here, but it's not as strong. So we don't have somebody saying, well, still the man's the head of the family, and therefore we're going to culturally or socially still have a bias toward the man. There may be other biases that do still do that. I mean, there's a lot of things in the law that are baked in from centuries ago that we're still finding will have an effect on legal issues in lots of areas of the law. So it's not that cultural biases have no effect on how the law is administered in a place like California, as opposed to Alabama, as opposed to, I don't know, North Dakota or Hawaii. So, it's just, I think that in California, the likelihood of abuse is as high as anywhere else. I just think that how it is handled and viewed as a society might be different from some other parts of the country.
Okay, interesting. All right, so we've been talking about physical violence. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your experience with seeing, or maybe even confusion with seeing emotional abuse coming into your courtroom, and how you, because those are the people that I'm working with.
Yeah.
Christian women who are being emotionally and spiritually abused and manipulated, right, controlled. That's a little more subtle, and it's very difficult for people to understand it. It's difficult to figure out what's up and what's down, who's telling the truth. Do you see that a lot in your courtroom, and what do you do with cases like that?
I was actually talking about physical and emotional and verbal abuse when I was talking about these various types of violence cases. So I guess to me, I've been doing this for over 2.5 decades now.
Yeah.
And I've been on the bench since 1995. And I would say that the violence or the abuse, however it comes in, is almost never one-dimensional. Verbal abuse has a component of emotional abuse. Emotional abuse has a component of verbal abuse, or physical abuse has a component of all of these others as well. Mm-hmm. They all just keep going together. So, yeah, I think at least in my training sessions on violence, and it could be domestic violence or any other type of violence, we don't look on it as, that's physical violence, so that's different from something else.
Okay.
In fact, in a non-domestic relationship, we have a statute that we sometimes refer to as criminal threats statute in California. And it is considered a type of violence or serious felony, but it has no component of actually committing a physically violent act upon someone else.
Interesting.
It's the words and conveying the threat of violence that is being punished.
This is very encouraging, actually, to me. So for the women who are listening, who maybe are looking at possibly being in court in the future, what would you tell them as far as, because I know they're scared. I never ended up having to go to court, but I was terrified that I was going to have to go, and that I was going to have to try to explain my situation, which I'd been shut down by the church and by so many people. To talk about my situation in front of a judge felt so intimidating to me. I mean, my brain would just shut down just thinking about it.
Right.
And so what would you say as a judge, if you could talk to the women coming into your court who are coming from the background that these women are, what would you say to them to encourage them or to empower them in your courtroom?
I don't know that I would say anything to encourage or empower, because that's not really my job. I would say to anybody coming into court, woman or man, on any type of case at all, do your best to be as prepared as possible. In our area, we have a law school that has a family law clinic, which assists low-income people, including in domestic violence cases. But in every courthouse in California, there is also, I shouldn't say every courthouse, because some counties have lots and lots of courthouses that don't even do family law cases. But anyway, my point is that in every county anyway, there is a family law facilitator in the courthouse, paid for by state funds, who is there to advise people in their cases. And they can do everything from tell you how to put together your paperwork with a request for a domestic violence restraining order, or how to conduct a full-blown family law trial on custody and support. So I would tell people, take advantage of whatever the resources are to be fully prepared. And I know you're primarily focused upon how women are going through all of this, but I would also tell people, because I get criticism from men's rights advocates sometimes, that the vast majority of people who are in court on issues of domestic violence are women as the victims, but there are also those cases where the men are the victims. And so if you're looking at a judge and saying, finally somebody who's going to stand up for the women, no, it's finally somebody who's going to give me a fair hearing, because nobody has done that before.
Mm-hmm.
So if they come into my courtroom, what they're going to get is a fair hearing. They're not going to get somebody who's going to be an advocate standing up for their side. If you're looking for a judge to do that, then I think you're misunderstanding the judicial system. And you're probably hoping for something that would be a complete disaster. If judges listened to both sides and then said, oh, now I know who to be an advocate for, let me go beat up the other side for you. Because that's not what you do. I mean, and nobody wants a judge to do that, do they? I mean, What if I that the man was right? Do the women want me to go beat up on the women? I mean, no. I mean, that's not our job.
Right.
Our job is to have a place where they can come in and know that they will be treated respectfully and fairly, and they'll be given a full hearing, and that the decision that's made is one that is made without regard for which person is nicer or has more power or anything like that. The decision is going to be made based on the evidence that's presented and the legal standards that apply. One of my colleagues who long retired now, but when I first came on, she was one of the senior judges. And she said, you do family law, and at the end of the hearing, you have made one permanent enemy and one temporary friend. and that temporary friend will become your permanent enemy as soon as you have another hearing and you've ended up ruling against them. And then you have two permanent enemies. And that's how family law goes. Now, that's an exaggeration. I've had family law hearings where both sides have had some level of appreciation for how the hearing went. But yeah, you don't finish a family law hearing and then have both sides say, boy, this was the best thing ever, Judge. Thank you so much for that ruling, because you just told me I only get my kids 50% of the time. You're the best.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a great segue into a question now that gets into what your book is about. Because what you've just described sounds like a profession where you're just, overall in general, people don't really like you that much. Does that affect you at all? I mean, does that have an effect on you? Did that play a role in, or does that play a role in your battle with anxiety, depression, other things going on in your life?
Not in the courtroom. If you're in the courtroom, hoping that by the end of the hearing, people are going to like you, then don't be a judge.
Right.
Yeah, just not going to happen. And that's not the goal. The goal is, what are the legal standards? What findings would be made on the evidence presented, and how does that then lead to the decision? So legal standards would be something like, let's say in a criminal case where they've waived a jury, so I'm the one determining guilty or not guilty. The legal standard ultimately is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, fine. Then I have to make findings. Let's say it's a car theft case. So there's a few findings that would have to be made beyond a reasonable doubt before the person could be found guilty. So my findings would be, was the person driving a car belonging to another person with the intent to deprive the owner temporarily or permanently of the use of the car without the owner's permission? So I have to make all of those findings. And then if I make all of those findings that, yes, those have been proved beyond a reasonable doubt, then I can make the ruling that the person is guilty. So that's what a judge does. And I don't think, when I'm done, is everybody in the courtroom going to like me? That's ridiculous. So I don't care if they like me or not. I care that I've made the right findings and rulings and stuff along the way and applied the right legal standards. So that, I guess that's part of it, is the actual courtroom stuff. Don't hope that people are going to like you at the end. And especially as you go through all of this, there's a ton of other things that have to happen. Maybe one of the attorneys wants to put on evidence of prior auto thefts, and the other attorney wants to keep them out. And there are standards that apply as to whether I would let that evidence in or not. And I have to follow those standards. And if I find that of these, I don't know, let's say the person has 5 convictions for auto theft, and I find that 2 of them are not closely enough fitting the standards to come in, but 3 of them fit squarely within the standards to come in. So I say, okay, I'm going to exclude these 2 and I'm going to allow these 3. Are they going to say, oh boy, the judge split the baby as best he could, we both love the judge? Or is it more likely that one of them is going to say he should have kept out all 5, and the other one's going to say he should have left in all 5? Right. So, I don't care what they think. If they, and frankly, if I get it wrong, there's a court of appeal that will be happy to tell me so. So I just figure, I'm making rulings. Take me up on appeal if you don't like it. What really bugs me, and it's not a matter of whether they like me or not, but I do get a little peeved when attorneys might criticize a ruling to their colleagues. Can't believe the judge made that ruling on the evidence. And I think, well, that's great. Did you take me up on appeal? No. Then what are you complaining about? Right. Wasn't a big enough deal for you to do anything.
Right.
So, yeah.
So speaking of attorneys, do you very often see women or men representing themselves? And in those cases, what is your thought on that? And because there's a lot of women who can't afford an attorney, and
Yeah.
people will ask me, is it okay to represent myself? What are my chances if I represent myself? What would you say to that?
Yeah. For example, our family law facilitator in our courthouse can equip someone quite well to represent themselves at a hearing in family law. But you also have to have the ability to pull things together. The old line about someone who acts as their own attorney has a fool for a client, I don't think that's true. It can be. I mean, there are some people who, they shouldn't go to law school and become attorneys, and they shouldn't act as their own attorneys either. They just don't have the ability to do that. They need some help.
Mm-hmm.
And yet sometimes they still end up having to represent themselves. And that's where we have an ethical duty in California. And I mean, it is written in the law that this is something we're required to do. We have an ethical duty to take the necessary steps to provide someone the ability to present their case. So as a judge, if I had attorneys there, I would just look at them and say, you put on your witnesses, you ask them the questions, I'll make rulings at the end. If I have two people who are representing themselves, could be a family law case, could be a small claims case, and in small claims, you don't get to have an attorney in California. Well, then I'm the one I might look at them and say, so why is it you're asking me for a restraining order against this person? Tell me what happened. Or why is it that you are suing this person for not paying you something? Tell me what happened. And I kind of leave it open. But if they sound like they're fumbling through something, I am ethically obligated to try to get that information from them. So I might say, wait a moment, are you now talking about a different incident, or are we still on the first date that you mentioned? And they'll say, oh, I'm talking about a different one now. And then I'll say, are you done with the first date? Because I'd like to hear all of that part right now. What happened on the first date you mentioned? And they'll say, oh, yeah, there is one more thing from that. It's like, okay, well, I'm not becoming their attorney and I'm not advocating things. I'm the finder of fact, and I will do that with both sides to try to get the information that I need in order to make a decision. But I'm ethically obligated to do that. It is actually written in our Code of Judicial Regulations that I have to take those types of steps to provide someone an opportunity to be heard fully. And like I say, it's not necessarily family law. It could be somebody who's representing themselves in a criminal case, probate, whatever.
Well, that's also encouraging. I hope that the women that are listening are seeing that it's much less scary than they may be. Here's the problem: not knowing things is what's scary. If you understand things and know things, then it's just it's the unknown that's so frightening. Okay, right. So I want to get back to, I want to talk about your book now. Okay. And actually, yeah. Actually, let's talk about who writers read. They do.
Yeah.
And you are a reader and a writer. So what are your recommendations, or who are the best female writers that you have found to be most helpful to you that you could recommend to my audience?
Okay. Jane Austen.
Boom.
Dorothy Sayers.
Can you give a brief sentence about why, like what your, like one reason why you really like that particular author?
Sure. If you are hoping to understand how people relate to one another and how deeply that is felt inside of people, then read Jane Austen. Besides the fact that she is completely entertaining and at times such a hoot that, just read her stuff. And people always say, oh yeah, well, I've read Pride and Prejudice. And I'm thinking, you have barely scratched the surface.
Yeah.
Read all 6 novels. and then go find her unpublished juvenilia that is available online, all the things that she wrote before she became published, when she was still a teenager and a young woman. Yeah, go find those things and read them. So anyway, so Jane Austen, Dorothy Sayers, because she deeply goes into social issues that are timeless. And she does it in the context of mystery writing. I'm thinking of the Lord Peter Wimsey novels, for example, where in Gaudy Night, which is just about smack in the middle of the series, she focuses on a women's college in Oxford University system. And the issue of women's rights, women in education, women as intellectual leaders, women as social leaders. She writes this story that touches on all of this without preaching, oh, hey, I'm going to do a women's lib novel. She didn't.
Right.
But that's what the book tackles.
Yeah.
So I'd say both of them. If you're looking for people who are writing now, I strongly suggest reading Amy Bird, Byrd, and Amy is spelled Aimee. She's got 5 books out by now, I think. Her first one was Housewife Theologian, which was also the name of her blog way back when. Mm-hmm. And her most recent one, I think it's Recovering from Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, is the title. I could be off a little bit. Amy is not an egalitarian, but she is a friend of mine, and she and I have talked about this at length. And she writes theologically, doctrinally, scripturally about the importance of men and women having deep and strong relationships with each other. For example, her most recent book goes at the concept of pursuing biblical manhood and pursuing biblical womanhood. And she essentially says, for crying out loud, the Bible says we pursue Christ. and she wrote an entire book about that.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's really good. But if someone's going to say, hey, Tim recommended this book and I read it, she's not egalitarian. It's like, no, she's not. But her writing is so strong. She is just very, very good at communicating this. So I would say Amy Bird is where you go. I'm also looking forward to Valerie Hobbs, Dr. Hobbs. She has a book on language. Now, she's a linguist, and she has a book on language in Scripture that's coming out next year. And I am so itching to get a hold of it because I love words and I love language, and I love looking at linguistics when it's dumbed down enough to where I can understand it. And I don't think she is going to dumb anything down. It's going to be challenging, but she is writing it, I think, for the non-academic market, though, even though she is an academic herself. So I'm really looking forward to that book from Valerie Hobbs, and I would tell people to also read Amy Bird.
Okay, I need to have both of those women on here.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, what?
I say it absolutely, and have them on together because they're friends. They know each other.
Oh, my word. That would be so much fun. I'm totally going to do that.
Yeah. So Amy is in Maryland and Valerie is in England. So you'll have to coordinate your timelines.
The lands. Okay. This is good. All right. So those are the things that you read, or some of the things that you read. I'm sure you read a million other things.
Oh, I read a lot of cozy mysteries. That's what I spend my time on. So that's.
Do you like Louise? Is it Penny Louise or Louise Penny? Can't remember.
I have
don't
not
know
read
either one.
I've not read her, but I do read Catriona McPherson, and who writes the Dandy Gilver mysteries. Let's see, another one that I recently have been reading is Frances Brody, who does the Kate Shackleton mysteries.
Oh, yes. I've not read them, but I know what you're talking about.
And then there's, gosh, I wish I remembered the name of the author. She writes the Royal Spyness mystery series. And
That's a clever
anyway,
title.
yeah, it's about a very minor, very like 35th in line for the throne, minor member of the royalty who is penniless and cast out on her own to fend for herself kind of thing when her father, the Duke, goes penniless and then dies. So she is off on her own. And she solves mysteries around the world kind of thing. Cool. So that's great. I've really enjoyed those. So yeah, I read the cozy mysteries, although I just ordered a couple of books that are going to be a little more serious. One that should be delivered today is the annotated complete poetry of Langston Hughes. And then I also ordered Esau Macaulay's Reading While Black, and that's going to come to me in a few days. So,
well, those are timely books too for our time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your book now. Why don't you tell everyone what it's called and what it's about?
Because you've teased them by mentioning it like 3 times.
I know, and we never quite get there. Let's go there now.
Okay. Running for Judge, Campaigning on the Trail of Despair, Deliverance, and Overwhelming Success. That's the name. Okay. What else do you want to know?
Well, I want to know, I want to tell them what it's about, because sure. I touched on it a little bit because I mentioned that you struggled with mental illness. Right. So they're probably all thinking in the back of their mind, because here's the thing. A lot of these women are very familiar with that. They're familiar with it in their own lives. They're familiar with it in their children's lives. Right. They're familiar with other kinds of mental illness in their husbands' lives, in their families of origin. And I feel like it's more of a recent breakthrough that we're finally talking about it, getting help for it, and whatever. So, but yours is a bit of a spin because you're a judge. So people tend to look at people like that and think, well, you must have your life all together. And you have even said, when I'm in my courtroom, this is my courtroom. I mean, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, it's got to have some kind of effect on you, though. I mean, hearing all those stories and being responsible for all those lives. So talk about it.
So I wrote the book about my re-election campaign back in 2008. As I said a few minutes ago, I became a judge in 1995. And the book talks about how I received a judicial appointment and then immediately had an election cycle come around. Because in California, you can be appointed to fill out an unexpired term. Say a judge retires or gets elevated before their term is up. So the governor then appoints somebody to fill out the term. And that happened to me, 1995. Had to run for re-election in 1996, and then 2002, 2008, 2014, 2020. We have 6-year terms. And the only time someone decided to run against me was in 2008. So I'd been on the bench for 13 years, and somebody wanted to take my job away from me. And that was a huge source of stress because I had no background in campaigning or politics or anything like that. And it affected me physically and mentally. My body and my brain chemistry both were thrown off. I ended up coming down with pneumonia just a few weeks into the campaign, and with what was told to me anyway as a generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis with depressive episodes. And then I went on medication for anti-anxiety meds. I went on medication for my pneumonia infection. And that was the story of the book, is what it's like to be a judge, what it's like to be challenged and have to run a re-election, and what it's like when all of this then brings on mental and physical health impairments. And so you mentioned how people are saying, "Oh, you must have it all together because you're a judge," but really, so many people deal with mental illness. I put in the book that the statistic is essentially 1 in 4 people will have anxiety, depression, or both at some point in their life, if not as just a lifelong situation.
Yeah.
So,
I would think it would be even more than that.
It
I don't
might
know.
be.
Maybe I just know a bunch of, maybe everyone in my life has problems, but.
Right. So the stress of going through that is what brought all of this on for me, the physical and mental issues. But they're all medical issues. And so one of the reasons I wrote the book is because people who say, I don't have mental illness and I don't know anybody who does, they're wrong. They may themselves not have mental illness, but they certainly know someone who does. It's 1 in 4.
Yeah.
And sure, that's a broad average, but let's say you know 100 people, and everybody knows more than that. But let's say you know 100 people. Are you saying that you don't know 25 or 20 or 15? Because maybe I know 40, right, who are mentally ill, and you only know 15. But it's 100 people. Somebody in there is mentally ill.
Right.
They have, and I'm not talking about bipolar and schizophrenia and a whole bunch of other things. I'm just talking about anxiety and depression, let alone all the numbers of people who have other types of mental illnesses. So I wrote the book in order to take the stigma off of talking about mental illness, especially from someone who's not only an elected official. I'm a constitutional officer of the state of California with statewide jurisdiction. And I am writing about having a mental health diagnosis.
Yeah.
And, I think it's important that people see that even those who are the officials in the state helping to run the government are also dealing not only with mental illness, perhaps, but are able to do their job extremely well. And I don't mean to pat myself on the back by saying I do my job extremely well. I'm just saying that I do know how to do my job, and I do it well. I'm an effective judge. I've been doing this for a long time. I train other judges in how to be effective judges. And the mental health issues have not, that diagnosis did not disqualify me from being to get the job done.
Right. Well, and I think that opens up the conversation for other leaders in government and in all spheres of society. Just because you're a leader doesn't mean that you're not human. And
now, can you imagine if people talked about their pastors, let's say, and one of them said, "Oh, my pastor preached on mental health issues last week," and somebody else said, "Really? Because my pastor was just talking about her battles with mental health and how that affects her," and having those conversations normalized, and not like, "Your pastor has a mental health diagnosis. You better take her out of the pulpit. He better not be preaching anymore."
That's right. It's like popping a zit. You got to get the stuff out and expose it so that the healing can come.
Yeah, judges being identified as zits. I'm going to start using that in my in my training classes.
I know. As I said that, I was thinking, Natalie, shut your mouth. What are you saying?
I liked it. Always reminds me of John Belushi's part in the food fight in Animal House. So anyway.
I hope someone is going to know what you're talking about. I'm afraid I didn't see that one. So. Oh
yeah, well, you had to have been, a high school or college kid back in 1980 or so. Anyway,
I graduated in 85. But you know what? I was in the conservative. I grew up in the Bill Gothard thing, so we didn't watch things like Animal House.
Yeah, no movies, no.
So,
and if you're dancing, make sure there's enough room for the Holy Spirit between you and your partner.
Oh my goodness. Well, that is one thing I'll say. For those of you who are listening and you want to follow Tim on Facebook, let's see, Tim Fall. There's probably 1 million Tim Falls. How are you going to find you on Facebook? Oh, well, I'll put a link in the show notes.
Okay.
Yes. I forgot that I have show notes. Okay, I'm going to let you talk now and I'm going to be quiet.
Okay. So Facebook and Twitter, I'm sure if you just put in the search bar Tim Fall, you'll eventually stumble upon which one is mine. And then I do have a blog, timfall.com, which has all of those connections on the contact page, I think it is. And I have a YouTube channel because I post 2-minute videos every day.
Every day?
Yeah.
Wow, that is commitment.
Yeah, they're unscripted, and some of them are really, really good, and some are just like, wow, what did Tim say that for? But anyway, I still put them out. Doesn't matter.
Okay.
And I try to be encouraging, or sometimes I'm being topical. I might talk about things that are going on in my life, and more often talking about how things might be affecting other people. I started doing these 2-minute videos last March. The first one I did was an effort to encourage people just as we were going into the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And it was so well received that I did another one the next morning, and then I did another, and then I just kept doing them.
That's amazing. So the COVID has had such an impact in positive ways in so many areas. Mm-hmm. Okay, so those of you who are listening, I'll put all of this in the show notes with links, but I will say this, that Tim he's been kind of serious in this podcast, but
wait a sec.
I think you've been pretty serious, but but on Facebook, he's pretty funny and also really smart. So, I mean, what better combination can you have than funny and smart? And he doesn't talk. He's not like, I don't know, maybe this is just my imagination, but I think of a judge as talking way above everybody else. Tim's not like that. When I found out he was a judge, I was like, what? I guess I didn't know what you did. You were just Tim Fall.
What does this guy do to make any money? All right. And people for my book too, I should point out that even though my memoir is a memoir of a judicial reelection and talking about mental health issues, there's some pretty funny stories in there as well. So if people are looking for insights on what it's like to be a judge, they want to hear some funny stories, they want some serious stuff, it's all in there. And it's a quick read too. I mean, or you can do it on audiobook, go to Audible and it's there.
Are you reading? Do you read it?
It's my voice. That's
Love
me.
It.
And
that's awesome.
So if my voice has been grating on your nerves, folks,
don't get the Audible version.
And she just make him shut up, then please get the paperback.
No, I think you have a great voice and it's very easy to listen to. I would totally get the Audible version.
Well, you can also get it on Kindle if you want an ebook version as well. So there's that. My wife says that my voice puts her to sleep. So
that's careful. A good thing. That's a really good thing.
It's just something we have to be careful about if we're praying together at night, that we don't do it while we're both already yawning our heads off.
Right. Well, I don't think you've put anyone to sleep in this podcast episode. So, and I just want to thank you so much for giving us some of your time. And I wish you the best on your book. And I will definitely be putting links to the book, the different versions of the book as well in the show notes. So those of you who are listening can head over to flyingfreenow.com/106. That's this episode number. And there you will find the show notes for this episode. So thanks again, Tim.
Can I mention a discount for people who might be looking for my book?
Absolutely.
All right. If you don't like to shop Amazon, and a lot of people don't, go to the publisher webpage, WIPF, WIPF, and stock, all spelled out, STOCK, WIPF and stock, and search for Running for Judge. At checkout, use the code JUDGE40. So that's all together, JUDGE40, and it will give you 40% off the list price.
Wow. Okay. So are those letters all caps? Are they all lowercase?
All caps, Judge, and then the number 40, and squish it all together without any spaces.
Okay, no spaces. Okay, because I will put that link in also. Did you include that link in? Did you send me that link, or do I need to get that from you?
It's quite possible that I did, but I'll send it to you.
All right. Well, no matter what, you guys who are listening, I will make sure that link is also included in there. And I'll put the password in there too, just in case you forget, Judge 40. Is that because you're 40 years old?
No.
Oh, no. Just kidding. People have probably already done the math when you mentioned the 80s. So,
I will point out that here's a spoiler for the book. Yes, I was 35 when I became a judge.
Wow, that is so young.
Yes, it is. Yep.
Oh my goodness. Do they even know what they're doing at age 35?
I didn't, I'm 60 and I don't know what I'm doing. So what are you talking about?
That's true. Good point. All right. Well, I think that's a wrap. Until next time, fly free.